For this evening's event, I am referred to as a philosopher. Elsewhere, I've been called an artist, an inventor, even a scientist. But honestly, none of those things really apply to me. I'm simply not remotely qualified. That's why my business cards say Untitled. But if I had to come up with a job description for a resume or something of the sort, I would have to say that I'm a dilettante. Now, generally, this is an insult, but I'm not trying to be self-deprecating here. If anything, I think that it's somewhat of a boast. I think that dilettantism is in our society something which is deeply underrated, but also is absolutely essential, especially as we become, as a society, more and more specialized in various pursuits, in the sciences, in academia in general, in technologies. All of these specializations being absolutely essential toward the exploration of the world and potentially the destruction of it, but also that they have enormous power in their own siloed way, which becomes even more powerful, I believe, when one field can be mixed with another, when insights from one place can inform another, and in all of that mix-up, which can be quite confusing, you can end up with new ways of looking and new ways of moving forward, all of these different worthy pursuits. But those are not my pursuits. As I mentioned, I'm a dilettante, and I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about the various ways in which I go about my dilettantism in order to try to persuade you that this is somewhat of a worthwhile activity, at least a career. I guess I will tell you about 3 different projects that illustrate this and see whether there's time for more. And I'll start with real estate. In 2006, I decided to get into real estate. It was a boom, not as boomful as the current one, but nevertheless, it was quite extreme. And the thing was that I didn't know anything about real estate. I also didn't have any money. But I really wanted to do this, and it happened to be that one thing that I knew a little bit about, I've been doing a little bit of reading, New Scientist and various other sorts of publications that get you into trouble thinking you know more than you do. I've been doing a little bit of reading about string theory. And I realized that was actually the key. That was my way into real estate development. And I could do it in a way that nobody else was. String theory posits that there are multiple dimensions of space, more than we ordinarily encounter. So we ordinarily have 3 dimensions that are the dimensions that are forward, backward, side to side, up and down. But there may be, according to which string theory you go with, which landscape you go with, there may be quite a lot of dimensions out there. And nobody was doing anything with them. So I realized that I, in fact, could really kind of make a killing there by being the first one in. Now, this sounds like a joke, but there actually is a legal framework for it that I was able to invoke, which is air rights. Air rights allow you to operate within the 3rd dimension, going up. They're very popular in New York. So I was able to take that basis for a contract that I could then go around to people who lived in the Bay Area, who owned houses, apartments, and I could negotiate with them to purchase the rights to develop in the extra dimensions of space for their property. And quite frankly, nobody was using these dimensions. In fact, most of the people I talked to didn't even know they were there, which is somewhat understandable because they are probably about 10 to the negative 35th meters, curled up very small, so as a result, it's smaller than most closets in San Francisco. And I think that they are nevertheless potentially highly attractive if you just present them in the right way, which is to say, to open up a real estate office, which is what I did. I opened up a real estate office, and I decided that I would present these properties that I had purchased, and I paid bottom dollar. I think $5 to $10 a piece was basically what I was paying various people to get a contract to develop in those extra dimensions. And using the logic of real estate, I subdivided and sold subdivisions in my real estate office. Now, string theory, as even a string theorist will tell you, is highly speculative. So I wanted to make this attractive to people, and as a result, I took the Zillow price and I slashed it 1/1,000,000th of that price, and that was my offering. So you could walk into the real estate office, and for, I think the lowest price property I had was a nice apartment in the Mission District, a subdivision in the extra dimensions, mind you, but nevertheless, prime real estate was 9 cents. People put it on their credit card anyway, but nevertheless, I managed to sell quite a few of them, and I think that the reason why is that I think I was actually pretty persuasive. I tried to contextualize this, accentuating the positive, which is what you do in real estate. And the way in which I did so was I didn't mention, well, I did. In fact, I probably was not as good a salesman as I could have been, because I did mention the whole thing about how 10 to the negative 35th meters is smaller than the average diameter of plumbing. But I also said that the thing about these dimensions is that there are a lot of them. So as a result, you can build an extraordinary home, or you can imagine, so you can have a 4-dimensional house, what I call tesseract house, and I made blueprints so that you would be able to do so if you so chose. And as a result, there was a huge influx of interest. I think I made on the order of $125. And then I started to get bored, because I'm a dilettante. So I figured that I better get into another industry. And another industry that I thought I might try out was film industry. Hollywood seemed big, but there were a lot of people already there, like Steven Spielberg, for instance, and James Cameron. I didn't want to compete with them because I never had operated a video camera before. So I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. But I figured once again, in the same way that I wasn't competing with Coldwell Banker on the real estate gambit, that maybe I could sort of work my way around the greatest obstacle, which is success of other people, by, in this case, finding an alternate audience. Well, I found one, a really good one, I think, that was really big, and that is plants. Now, plants are an ideal audience for film. If you think about it, photosynthesis is really, it's all about light, and that's what movies are made of. A plant can experience a movie much more intensely than you or I can do. And so I then had the problem of asking myself, given that I had this potentially enormous audience, there are many more plants than there are people in the world, that I didn't really know what a plant would like. I'm not a plant. So I figured that what I better do is I better start out, as so many filmmakers do, well, I started out in pornography. Sex seemed like something that many plants would be interested in, because many plants actually do reproduce sexually. And so what I did was I went out and I started making movies. I filmed honeybees pollinating flowers. Highly titillating stuff if you're a plant. And I got down on the ground, got a plant's point of view in order to make this as experiential as possible for the plant, and was able then to take this smut and to open up what I believe to have been the world's first porn theater for plants, which was in the town of Chico, California. These are 90 rhododendrons that were enjoying this particular pornography. So it was, I think, relatively successful, but I kind of felt like I better try to go legit. And also I felt like there were some plants, like ferns, that were getting left out, that were another audience that still Steven Spielberg and James Cameron and others were not going after, so I still had a chance. And so I decided that I should think about what might be a more respectable, elevated sort of film I could make for plants that also would be more universal, that wouldn't require flowering. And that, of course, came down to one thing that's true of almost all plants, namely that they have roots. They don't go anywhere. So I started making travel documentaries. What I did was I went to Europe and I started filming. Now, of course, if you're doing this for people, what you do is you film the Eiffel Tower. But plants aren't really interested in the Eiffel Tower. Plants are instead, well, they're interested in the sky. And so that's what I filmed. I went to Europe and I filmed skies, which I then was able to bring back to New York City to project for the enjoyment and I believe also potentially for the edification of houseplants. And as you'll see, the setup here was a little bit different than the case of the porn, and that's because I try to be as true as possible to my audience. I try to respect their way of life. And plants, unlike us, they don't have eyes, which means that they are not able to perceive the sky as we would in terms of the cloud cover. So essentially what I did was I made a scrim that I could project through so that what you get, if you're a plant, you get the aggregate light of the sky. And it changed over time because I filmed in Europe for many days, in Italy as it happened, and I got some clouds and I got some sun and basically anything you could possibly want if you were a plant. But I'm not a plant, as I said earlier, and I like to be also of service to my own kind, to humans, which I am, and which I feel have all sorts of problems, all sorts of things that potentially can be addressed by a true dilettante who is not going to work as an accountant or something of the sort, but is going to maybe get a little bit confused and get things a bit mixed up. And one thing that seems to cause a lot of people a lot of consternation are relationships, people's relationships with other people. And if you really think about what the root of it is, one possibility would be marriage, specifically marriage law. Marriage laws tend to get in the way of relationships because they're imposed from the top down by governments or religious authorities in ways that basically delineate how you can relate to someone else. And to me that seems kind of arbitrary and not very fair. And so I started to think about what might be another way in which we could achieve what marriage does that would be much truer. And I came up with, I think, the most romantic thing imaginable, which is quantum entanglement. Namely, quantum entanglement posits that when two or more particles are entangled, they behave as if they were one and the same, even if they are separated by the entire cosmos. Now that's romantic. That is the essence, I think, of what marriage really is, and it doesn't require a government to make a law. In fact, it's a law of nature. It is the most natural sort of relationship possible. So how do you do it? What do you do in order to take this notion and realize it? Because I'm very practical. I don't just want to kind of give this hypothetical. I wanted to provide people with the opportunity to become entangled. And so, of course, what you do is that you create an apparatus in which people are able to become entangled. The apparatus here is actually very simple. Essentially what we have is a nonlinear crystal which will entangle photons, in this case of sunlight, coming through a window. And those photons are then passed through a beam splitter, such that two people standing below are bombarded with photons, some of which will be entangled. And by the photoelectric effect, in some cases, there is the chance that some of them, an electron maybe, might become, for some time, maybe potentially entangled. Now, all of that equivocation is because I'm kind of inept at these things, but also is because of the nature of the science itself, that when you have two people getting entangled, you are operating under quantum theory, quantum mechanics. And quantum physics, any measurement that you make is going to have an effect on the system. And in the case of quantum entanglement, if you try to measure a quantum state to see if it's entangled, that very act of measurement will disentangle it. So that's where it gets even more romantic, I think. Because that's where we get into the fact that you can become entangled, but you can never know that you are. You become entangled in any way that you want. There are people in New York who were doing so in this, in the AC Institute, where I had the apparatus set up, where it was not only two people, but sometimes three or four or more people, and there was even one person who got entangled with himself. He was a philosopher. So the thing, though, is that no matter what arrangement you come up with, you just can't know, and if you're skeptical, if you doubt the relationship, try to measure that state, you're no longer going to be entangled. And so, as a result, you end up with a necessity by science for a sort of a faith in the relationship that you have with another or with others. So these are three different projects that I wanted very briefly to get across, and I have around 5 minutes left, so I'm going to very briefly also tell you about a few others that in other ways have kind of gotten things mixed up and have confused me, so I hope they will also confuse you a little bit. One example was my attempt to genetically engineer God. I was interested in trying to figure out where on the phylogenetic tree, amongst all the various species, where you might put God, where God belongs. And since I couldn't obtain any DNA for God, I realized I would need to genetically engineer God in a laboratory. And as it happens, UC Berkeley is an incredibly liberal place. I was able to work in Tom Klein's lab in the genetics department to do some of the work in which I was able to use the operation of continuous in vitro evolution in order to be able to study incipient godliness in various species. And since I only have a couple minutes, I'll just cut to the chase and say that God seems to be most closely related to blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. I want to explain why. I tell you afterward if you'd like, if you want to take up some research. I think that a lot more people do because I think that what I've claimed and published is highly dubious, but nevertheless, I have been able, on the basis of that, to really kind of delve into many other areas of genetics. And most recently, of course, that means epigenetics. And that means another great opportunity. Something that a lot of people really are interested in is human cloning. And I realized that epigenetics was actually the perfect way in which to provide human cloning as a service to people without all of the rigmarole of trying to have people born into it. That is to say that what I could do is I could provide a chemical regimen, because epigenetics is basically the turning on and off of genes within an environment that through the expression of those genes, that is how you are expressed genetically. I could take you and Napoleon, for instance, or Lady Gaga was another one who I had as someone on offer, and I can turn on and off your genes in a way that replicates Napoleon's by giving you some rather nasty chemicals in this case. There's arsenic, that was for stomach treatment, there's lead, a bullet hole, a lot of cholesterol, a lot of chicken. I eat chicken every day. And so I was able to do this, and not only do this, but even more dangerously, I was able also to offer people that they could become epigenetic clones of me. So one other example, a third example is getting into time management. Once again, trying to be of service to people and feeling like none of these Franklin Planner sorts of operations really work. What we really need to do is we need to get at the essence of it. And the essence of it is, of course, it's general relativity. So I made time ingots that people could put on their desk, and they could ever so slightly, by the operation of the time in near proximity warping more than that farther away from their desk mate, they would be in a frame of reference that would be slightly more optimal in terms of their time for them relative to time for others. And that seemed to have done very well. A lot of people bought time ingots. They're made out of lead. It's a really good way to make a little bit of money. And so that, of course, got me pretty deep into time. And I think I have 1 or 2 minutes left, 1 minute left, speaking of time. And so I'll just end by saying that my current project has been an attempt at looking at deep time. Namely, I've been building cameras that take a very long exposure, 100 years in duration, that use a simple sort of a pinhole camera operation, but in which what you're doing is you're having the effect of light passing through fading paper. And I put these out in the world with the help of people who use them as surveillance cameras, not for us, but for generation not yet born, for people who are most affected by everything that we do, and yet at the same time are least empowered to do anything about it, so that there's a sense in which these cameras are bearing witness, and that everything that we do will be recorded and will become known by them. And of course, if you're going to do 100 years, why not do 1,000? That's what I'm doing next. I'm off to the to Arizona State University to install a Millennium camera that will look over the city of Tempe for the next 1,000 years, and I will get back to you with the results of them.